Welcome again to the NOAA conference here in Zurich, where there are startups and investors and lots of people here to see how they can maybe come together and finance this transition, sustainable transition that the world needs. I'm very pleased to have a guest with me again, and if you could say who you are and where you're from, please.
Okay, so I'm Henrik Nordborg. I'm originally from Sweden, but I'm now at the university in Switzerland, the Eastern Switzerland University of Applied Sciences, working on renewable energy and environmental technology.
Okay, great. And so why have you come to NOAA? What is it? What solution, what idea are you bringing to this august gathering of people?
Okay, let's give it an august answer. I come not to praise capitalism, but to bury it.
Okay, you come to bury capitalism.
No,
okay.
No, but I'm fascinating because I'm a physicist by training, and I work in renewable energy, and I have lots of colleagues working in this field. I work in the energy sector, and I think you see a clear disconnect between the political goals that were even stated at the Glasgow meeting of lowering carbon emissions by 50% by 2030, and people working in this sector actually know their stuff who say that that's out of the question. It can't be done with technology because simply there is no time for it. The energy sector has a huge inertia. It's a very slow-moving sector. Innovations in that sector will take years, decades to scale out. And so that is not going to happen. And I think this puts humanity in a very interesting position because we really have to answer first the question, is decoupling possible at all? And secondly, and I think that is answered already, even if it's possible, we can't do it that quickly. And the consequence, of course, is, well, in that case, we will have to do something else, which is basically reducing consumption. And by the way, consumption is not mentioned a single once in the Glasgow Climate Pact.
Yes, that's very true, actually, very true. I mean, there has been some decoupling in some countries, but you're saying that overall, even if we have some decoupling of economic growth from emissions, it's nowhere near what's needed. And that's just in a small number of maybe developed countries.
Exactly.
We're still in the developing countries not seeing any decoupling, I think. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I would even further and say the problem with, if you look at the global picture, I think you should look at the global picture. A lot of decoupling that has happened has been outsourcing.
Right.
Moving dirty industries from West industrial countries, so rich countries to poorer countries. Yeah. And so it's kind of it's
smoke and mirrors.
Smoke and mirrors.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You gave an example to me of Switzerland when we were chatting before. Give those numbers. They're quite interesting.
Yeah, and Switzerland is a perfect example. Perhaps the same numbers are more or less true for all industrial countries, but in Switzerland, it's like the carbon footprint from internal energy use is like 4.4 tons per capita. However, if you include imports, traveling, etc., what actually Swiss consume, you end up with 14 tons per capita.
Wow.
Which is, a bit far away from net zero.
Yeah. And their net zero is based on the 4 tons per capita, not on the 14, which is the more realistic amount of energy they are actually really consuming of both what's produced in Switzerland and what is imported from other countries into Switzerland.
So if you want to be really nasty, you can say the net zero strategy of Switzerland is actually a net 10 strategy.
Right. Interesting. So you have an interesting concept that you've been working on, which would be in a sense under the principle of the polluter pays, which you're going on sabbatical and you're hoping to flesh this out. And maybe perhaps through the Club of Rome or some other institution, bring it to the attention of world leaders at the next climate conference in Egypt. Give us a glimpse into what the thinking is here.
Well, it's very simple. What struck me is that the main source of carbon pollution comes from less than 300 corporations. These are the corporations that actually take fossil fuel out of the ground and sell it. And we know exactly if Shell sells a barrel of oil, we know exactly how much carbon dioxide will be emitted when you burn it. So there's really no reason why these companies should not pay a compensation of that into a global fund. And if you then take that would lead to immediately lead to a global carbon tax because they would pass on the cost to their consumers or their customers who would pass it on to their customers. In the end, the end user would pay for it. And then you take that money from the fund and distribute it over the countries to the countries of the world on a per capita basis, because then that would be the ultimate form of climate justice, and it would basically solve the problem of global poverty immediately.
Right. And fossil fuels would also not be as attractive.
Exactly.
And so basically it'd be a transfer of money from the big polluters to people in often in developing countries that need that money to lift themselves out of poverty. Because I mean, somebody in Bangladesh is certainly earning less than $2 a day, right? So
I mean, if you do the numbers, it's fascinating. $100 per ton of carbon dioxide would be like $3.6 billion per year to this global fund. If you divide it with the world population, you end up with $450 per capita a year to everyone in every country.
Right.
And for a country like Bangladesh, that would be an enormous influx of cash.
Incredible.
So I think the global south would immediately be on board.
Yes.
I'm convinced.
Yes. Maybe there might be a bit of a challenge with some of the global south that's producing oil, like Nigeria or Saudi Arabia or whatever. But
only with the part they use themselves, because I mean, if they sell the oil to other countries, they will of course pass on the costs to others. But of course, the idea would be that what I like about this idea is that it would end the debate about is decoupling possible or not. Rather than arguing this for another 50 years, why don't we try? Introduce a simple fee and we'll see what happens.
I suppose, in a sense, by looking at 300 corporations that are the ones basically digging all this dead wood that's been turned into coal and oil out of the ground and polluting our atmosphere, if you target the 300 corporations, it might be politically easier than just governments bringing in, kind of like an automatic carbon tax, which always seems to become politically very scary for some countries.
I think the politicians would love this idea because it's not them increasing the tax. I mean, they would not tell the fossil fuel companies to increase the price of oil. They would basically say you have to compensate it. So if fossil fuel companies are prepared to sacrifice their profit, they wouldn't actually have to increase the price. And if the price increases, then it's not the politicians. The politicians, it's not our problem.
Right.
These guys increase the price.
So what do you need to work on? What aspects? How do you need to refine this plan in a way that could be operational if people want to go for it?
Well, I think there's the financial economic aspect. You need some serious economists to actually go through the details, really crank the numbers, see what happens. I mean, you need experts on development to see how can you distribute this money, because that would of course have some unintended consequences if you shower these countries with cash. You need, of course, legal experts perhaps to work out the nitty-gritty details how to fix this. And then, but I think the main thing is that you need, and I think that's the important message, you need to build up an enormous public pressure with this statement. 300 corporations could actually solve our problems tomorrow if they wanted to. And I think that's kind of, and I think you can, since there are very few of these, and there are many of us, it should be possible to crank up this pressure on these companies to the extent, I mean, you can think about it like Shell. They're being sued by I think it was the government of Holland that sued them. And I mean, there are lots of legal actions against the companies. There are lots of public pressure. There's lots of, they are basically losing their social license to operate, as someone formulated this. And to give them this way out, to say, okay, it's fine. You sign up for this program, then you are allowed to continue with their business as usual. That's the only thing you have to do. And so if you do that, then you're a good company. If you refuse, then of course these are the really bad guys, and I think we have to increase the legal, the public, the political pressure on these companies.
Clearly, at some moment, we don't want them to burn oil anyway. So, I mean, doesn't this just allow them to continue their business model as usual? Where's the end game to this?
Well, the end game is, of course, that you should use the number, the tax or the fee that you want to impose. That's of course the knob that you can turn to. We know what we want to achieve. We need to have a reasonably fast decarbonization of the global economy.
Yeah.
And this is now the way you regulate that. You have to increase this number until carbon emissions go in the right direction.
So eventually the price would become higher and higher over time. It would be an escalating tax on these three corporations to compensate for their pollution.
But of course, you couldn't add other aspects, like saying that these companies, okay, they act as tax collectors, they could actually keep some of the money they collect if they use that in transforming their own business.
Ah, that's an interesting idea. So yes, and if they start investing a little bit more in renewables rather than talking about investing more in renewables. Yeah.
Exactly.
So Henrik, when we were at Glasgow, as we don't have time TV, we were fascinated by the International Monetary Fund with their numbers on the sheer scale of fossil fuel subsidies, $11 million. I mean, it's a complex calculation they do, but you know, it runs into the trillions every year that governments are paying to basically pay for the destruction of planet Earth, to put it just very bluntly. And we've kept our counter. We were counting up how much was being spent. We kept that counter going. You can see it sort of on the screen here. So I got it a bit wrong before. This is since the beginning of COP. So since the beginning of COP now, we're standing at $583 billion that have been spent. Should we do something about that? Is this a bit silly that we're doing this?
I mean, it's an absolute disaster, but there is some method to the madness here, I would say. And that is, of course, the dirty truth. I think 84% of global energy demand is covered by fossil fuel currently, still. Fossil fuel is, in our current society, too important to be left to the private sector. This is why, because I think much of this money goes into oil exploration. And I think governments realize that, I mean, if you suddenly run out of oil one day, without having done this transformation first, that would be an absolute disaster. So they are basically paying these companies to keep the oil flowing, which is, of course, the completely wrong way to do it. They should, of course, use this money to start this transformation away from oil. But on the other hand, I mean, I think they're like scared that if the fossil fuel supply drops too fast, then we will have a disaster. I mean, that's of course the nasty truth, that if we were to turn off the use of fossil fuel tomorrow, I mean, the majority of humanity would die. I think that's a fair assessment. You would not be able to produce the food. You would not be able to distribute the food that we need. I mean, it would be. So I mean, it is a transformation process. But of course, that's stupid. I mean, they're not investing in the money very wisely that way.
So maybe we need some kind of plan, a bit like your plan with a tax on the 300 corporations that are producing fossil fuels, and ratcheting up the how much that they have to pay over time to get them to change their business model, at the same time that we're also on a decline of fossil fuel subsidies, and that somewhere in the middle of this is a sweet spot where we actually are really going much faster with renewable energy, and also with storage, of course, which we need very much indeed.
And I also think we need global trust, and that seems to be pretty short on the ground now, because military aircraft and tanks will not be running with batteries anytime soon. We won't have climate compensated bombs anytime soon. As long as countries, I think in a way we have to get out of this rat race of global competition and basically say, come on, we are in this together. Because as long as there is no trust between countries, and I mean, I saw this figure that the US Defense Forces, defense in quotation marks, they use as much carbon or emit as much carbon dioxide as Portugal. I mean, it's a significant amount of energy and resources going into the military, and $2 billion per year. I mean, so if you say 5-point-something billion subsidies is madness, $2.2 billion for military expenses is also kind of stupid.
Yes, yes. There's a lot of stupid things going on in our global economy, but trying to tackle them all at the same time is a bit tough.
Yeah.
But a very interesting thought that you have there on putting effectively a carbon tax on the 300 corporations that are so much in the front of this problem of climate change is very good. So thank you very much indeed for being on. Best of luck with your research on this. I hope your sabbatical leads to a fruition of a fully fledged plan that we can all look at before the governments meet in Egypt next year for COP27.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.